Look, I don't want to keep talking about the gender pay gap or the gender wage gap, or more accurately, the gender earnings gap. I wish it would just go away like the non-problem that it is. And I wouldn't keep talking about it, only it is the single most misrepresented statistic on the face of the earth today. So yes, we are going to do this again, and this time the example comes via Canada and from what I used to think was a respectable magazine, MACLEAN'S. So MACLEAN'S is asking men to pay 26% more for their latest issue, and they have an explanation on their website. Why MACLEAN'S is asking men to pay 26% more for our latest issue. Pay equity is having its moment as the next beat in the cadence of the #MeToo movement. We hope this issue will stir urgent conversation already happening around the world. So call me a cynic, but I think there's your explanation. MACLEAN'S is jumping on a bandwagon, and this is a publicity stunt. This month, MACLEAN'S has created 2 covers with 2 different prices. One at $8.81, the other at our regular price of $6.99, to reflect the 26% gap between full-time wages paid to men and women in Canada. It's a cheeky way to draw attention to a gap that has barely budged in decades, but we're not the first to do this. Actually, it's not cheeky, it's completely ignorant and innumerate. The moment someone points out this gap without recognizing any caveats about what it represents, you know you're dealing with someone who is either dishonest or completely clueless about the topic. And take a look at the cover itself. The small print says, "We've made 2 covers with different prices, one for women and one for men. The prices reflect the shocking 26% pay equity gap that still exists in Canada. The context is exactly the same, just like the work that men and women do." So they're not just playing hide the ball with what it represents, they are flat out lying about it. The only other explanation is that they simply don't know what they're talking about. They say in the article that the 26% gap is the difference between full-time wages paid to men and women in Canada, but then imply on the cover it's for the same work, which of course it isn't. The 26% number takes no account of what type of work men and women are doing. I mean, this article is so removed from reality, they go on to cite the case of Carrie Gracie, the woman at the centre of the BBC non-scandal over pay. In England, Carrie Gracie, the BBC's China editor, resigned earlier this year when her pay was revealed to be at least 50% less than her 2 male counterparts, saying, "My managers had yet again judged that women's work was worth much less than men's." #I stand with Carrie trended on Twitter. But what was actually revealed was that an audit found no evidence of systemic gender discrimination. The audit was conducted by 2 independent organisations and reviewed by an independent Court of Appeal judge. Oh, and let's not mention the fact that there was a 23% pay gap in favour of women among senior correspondents. But again, that gap is also irrelevant, as the PricewaterhouseCoopers report found. Where there were differences between men and women in the same role, it was typically driven by material and justifiable factors unrelated to gender, such as level of experience, skills, and market influences. However, in some cases, the objective and verifiable evidence for the pay discrepancy was more limited. So most of the time it comes down to other factors like experience, the type of things that the context-free gap that is constantly referred to by the likes of MACLEAN'S don't take into account. Oh yeah, and one more data point on the BBC saga. The PricewaterhouseCoopers report shows the BBC has identified 188 individuals who could get a pay rise, but 98 of these are men and 90 are women. Well, that didn't backfire at all, did it? Now, if you want more information on the BBC non-scandal, I recommend you watch Sargon's excellent video on this from a week ago. He goes through the entire history of this sad saga. Anyway, back to the MACLEAN'S article. They mentioned the ridiculous incident in Iceland where women walked out of work to protest the pay gap there, presumably because they don't understand basic statistics either. Now, in the middle there is a nauseating 5-minute video on how to fix the pay gap, which of course does not address why there's a pay gap in the first place. And I think this line sums it up perfectly.
And I am much more concerned about what we're going to do about it than why it's happened.
Well then, I don't care why there's a gap in workplace deaths. We just need to fix it. But that's where we are now. It doesn't matter what causes it, it just needs to be fixed. Equality of outcome is what's important. Now, you don't find out until near the end of the article that if you are a male, you don't have to pay the higher price, presumably because that would be illegal. But, and this is another reason I made this video, a number of idiot males will pay the higher price because they unquestionably believe this nonsense. But before I get to those, there were 33 comments on this article at the time of making this video. I went through all of them and counted 30 against the article, calling it out for misrepresenting the pay gap. The remaining 3 just claimed there's discrimination without providing any evidence. Listen and believe. Now to the MACLEAN'S Twitter thread. It's hard to know whether these males are just clueless or virtue signalling. Here's one from the stunning and brave Ulrich Shannon, Consul General of Canada in Turkey. A very creative way to demonstrate the need for pay equity. Canada's MACLEAN'S article charges men a higher price for this week's issue because a 26% pay gap is not acceptable in 2018. Well, here's a little tip, Ulrich. If your argument is because current year, then you don't have an argument. Here's another tweet from the progressive-looking library junkie. I don't typically buy MACLEAN'S because free from the library, but I will buy this one and I will pay the higher price. The difference goes to Inspire and supports Indigenous women in education. Brilliant. So you're going to buy the magazine that you usually read for free at the library because the $1.82 difference goes to support Indigenous women in education. Well, here's another idea. Why not read the magazine at the library for free like you usually do, and then with the money you save not buying the magazine, you can make a much larger donation to Indigenous women in education. But I suppose if you believe the nonsense being spewed by MACLEAN'S, then that kind of basic financial common sense eludes you. This was pointed out to the genius later on in the tweet thread, and if you look at the entire tweet thread, no one supports this idiot. They call him out for his obvious virtue signalling. But this is the problem. A noisy minority of people that don't understand basic statistics drive this debate. Most who've looked into it know it's nonsense. So here's a recommendation the next time you hear someone try on the wage gap argument as misrepresented by MACLEAN'S. Give this confused individual the following simple hypothetical example. I have 2 neighbours. Both work full-time. One of my neighbours is a male and he earns $100,000 a year. My other neighbour is a female and she earns $80,000 a year. That's all the information you have. Then ask what accounts for the difference in their earnings. Now, if the person you're dealing with has even half a brain, they'll say, how can I possibly know that? I don't have enough information. And then you can break it to them that that's exactly what the gender pay gap argument is as misrepresented by the likes of MACLEAN'S. You might then ask them what kind of information you would need to know to account for the difference between what my 2 hypothetical neighbours earn. And again, if they have a modicum of common sense, they will say things like, what kind of jobs do they have? How old are they? How much experience do they have? Etc. And then you can explain to them that the pay gap argument takes absolutely none of those factors into account. And if they still want to insist that the pay gap is a problem, then just slowly back away. And before I go, I encourage all Canadians that buy MACLEAN'S to boycott the magazine and send a message that you're not going to pay for shoddy journalism. I'll see you next time.